Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gaming News, where we discuss all things within the gaming industry. And as it should be absolutely no shock to anyone, we are, of course, going to talk about the biggest piece of news in all of gaming, which is the Activision Blizzard and Microsoft deal that is going through as we speak. And this story continues to develop as time goes on. So the announcement started on the 18th of January, where a press release was officially put out on the Activision website, where they talk about the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft directly on the investor.activision.com website. And of course, it was early on January 18th that this deal went through. And for close to $70 billion is what was paid at the end of this acquisition. Now, this brings forward a lot of different ideas, especially considering that Activision Blizzard has a number of heavy hitting titles that they have been working with. But the thing here is that, unlike the rest of the industry, many people look at this like it is a saving grace and that it will be good for the franchises that Activision Blizzard used to hold, now that Microsoft has the rights and the IPs to all of these things. I am in a slightly different camp. So we're going to talk about a number of things here. Now, of course, what this means is that the acquisition allows them to have the Warcraft franchise, Diablo, Overwatch, Call of Duty, Candy Crush. They, of course, will have Spyro. And with this acquisition, it means that Microsoft is now the third largest gaming company behind Tencent and Sony, which is something that we're also going to cover throughout this video because that is actually kind of huge when you consider it. Now, of course, Xbox put out their own press release on their website about the acquisition, and about the fact that they are going to do right, hopefully, by these franchises, and it puts a lot of question into whether or not certain titles are going to become Xbox exclusive or if they are going to be allowed on other platforms. Now, I will link to all of these articles in the description below, but it means that this is definitely a hot topic for the entire industry. Now, CEO Bobby Kotick of Activision fame is obviously going to address certain things and put on a very good face for the industry and try to be a role model and all of that bullshit that we know to be true. And he put out, of course, an email to the company where the deal is expected to close in June of 2023 officially, which means that Activision is going to remain independent until then. And this was, of course, related to us by Charlie Intel on Twitter, and I will link that tweet as well. But he talked about connecting things together, connecting communities together is a great thing, and I want to highlight something that was stated in this email, which you can see on the screen. We've transformed games into social experiences and enabled players to find purpose and meaning through the most engaging form of entertainment, our games. By doing so, we've created and entertained communities of hundreds of millions of players. Connecting these communities together is the next step. Facebook, Google, Tencent, NetEase, Amazon, Apple, Sony, Disney, and many more have ambitions for their own gaming and metaverse initiatives. Established and emerging competitors see opportunity for virtual worlds filled with professionally produced content, user generated content, and rich social connections. And I wanted to talk about this because there is actually some confusion with this type of statement. By saying that this is part of the metaverse, suddenly puts them into a strange situation versus Facebook and Meta, and how that was entirely rebranded, how we have seen reports of certain people and certain businesses being basically told by Facebook execs that they wanted the Meta name for themselves and that they were trying to put a patent or a copyright effectively on the name. And by saying that these acquisitions and stuff are part of the metaverse almost makes it feel like it has something to do with this metaverse thing that Facebook has going on, which has its own interesting implications. And I'm very curious to see what happens moving forward because of that language, if there's going to be a problem just based on that, regardless of if that has anything to do with Facebook and with the metaverse or not, it does bring up some interesting legal implications. Now, after that, we then saw published today that an IGN article had referred to the Wall Street Journal article, which was sort of the kickoff point for all of this news, stating that Bobby Kotick's future at Activision Blizzard after Xbox acquisition remains unconfirmed. Now, this article has been updated because we actually do have more news. As far as we have been told, Bobby Kotick will be able to live out his contract, but it means that after that point, after that contract is done, Bobby Kotick is basically out of the picture and he will retire gracefully like he always wanted. And if you remember in a previous video where I covered Activision Blizzard news, that I showed this particular graphic, which is now circulating once again through Twitter, showing how much money Bobby Kotick is set to make by contract depending on the cause of termination. And the fact that this is written into contract, even though we will be rid of one of the great evils within the gaming industry, he's still going to walk away with a pretty penny. Anyways, we move forward, and Bloomberg published an article on the 18th where it was titled, "With Activision Blizzard Deal, Microsoft Gets Another Scandal to Clean Up." And I want to talk a little bit more about this. At this moment, there are still two massive lawsuits going on with respect to Activision Blizzard. There's the EEOC and there's the DFEH. And they have previously talked about how they are going to bring it to a different courtroom. They're going to evaluate the lawyers on the case who previously worked for one of the other companies and then ended up being part of the legal team for the other company, which is immediately a conflict of interest. So there is all of that to consider. You have people leaving the company left, right, and center. You have people who have been talking about the sexual abuse and the fact that Bobby Kotick has known about this for years and did absolutely nothing. Activision Blizzard is not a great company, And Microsoft now inherits some of those problems and is going to have to deal with them. Now, this is going to be interesting in its own right because while financially it makes a lot of sense for Microsoft to pick up these IPs and these games and make them number 3 in the industry for gaming, it doesn't mean that they're absolved of the responsibilities that they're beholden to the gaming community. And that is to have a community that isn't rife with sexual harassment, with unequal pay, with money grubbing happening left, right, and center. And we all know that Microsoft has its own individual issues that I am not a big fan of, that I'm not going to cover in this video because that would take far too long. But essentially, they don't have an easy road. Financially, they will make a lot of money because even though there's bleeding subscriptions with World of Warcraft and they've got tons of players within Call of Duty and all of their resources have been allocated to the Call of Duty franchise, it will still make a lot of money, which makes a good sense in this case. And Microsoft getting the IPs for a whopping $70 billion does not seem like a lot of money when you consider how much some of these IPs continue to make to this day. Even though Activision Blizzard has lost the trust of the gaming industry as a whole, that doesn't mean financially they're not still making money hand over fist, right? Now, in terms of investing, often it is touted to buy low and sell high, and that is 100% true. But the catch here is you don't just buy stuff that is cheap just because it's cheap. You have to consider all aspects of that investment property before going in. And in this case, financially, this is a good decision, but for the greater industry, I'm not sure that it is yet because Microsoft is going to have to work very hard to bring these IPs and to gain that trust back from the gaming community. And if you're buying this for such an inexpensive price comparative to what it was before, you also then have to make sure that it doesn't go belly up. You don't just buy investments and stock of a company that is going really low down because the cost is good. You also have to make sure that that company is going to bounce back up because the idea is you make a massive profit when the stock rebounds. If, however, the stock that you have purchased or the thing that you have purchased was at such a low price and it keeps going down and then they declare bankruptcy, you've lost everything. There is no recovery from that. And this is what the risk is when you look at investment properties. And Microsoft and Xbox, while they're getting some beloved franchises and are going to try and save them, which is admirable, it also calls into question whether or not they're going to be able to because of how far down Activision Blizzard has already fallen. So keep that in mind when we look at this. Just because Xbox has purchased it, Microsoft has purchased Activision Blizzard and those IPs, does not mean they might be able to bring that back up. Now, I hope, as a person that likes a lot of those IPs, that it doesn't fall by the wayside. And I have talked about that previously. I'm still going to be concerned because I'm not sure that this is necessarily the best move here. And you also have to consider that what this means is Xbox will be able to look at opportunities to put these IPs onto the Xbox Game Pass, which again brings into question a number of different things. You have something like World of Warcraft, which requires a monthly subscription. Yes, you have the Game Pass, which is also a monthly subscription, but the amount of money that they're going to make off of that may not be as high financially as it was before. Also, we have to consider the fact that now that Activision Blizzard games are owned by Microsoft, is it now going to go the way of Minecraft where you have to log in with your Microsoft account? This is a huge deal. Like, I don't think you guys understand. Like, it's one thing to talk about the fact that Bobby Kotick is no longer going to be part of the industry in the near future, being 2023. That doesn't mean it doesn't have wider implications. And this is why I said I am not the one that's singing the songs that everybody else is singing, because I still feel like there's going to be a number of things and factors that have to be dealt with before everything closes properly, right? So then we move on to another IGN article, which is Sony speaks up about the state of Activision Blizzard games after the Xbox acquisition. And in this article, it may seem interesting because a lot of people are now looking to Sony like, well, how are they going to deal with the news? Because now Xbox is really catching up to them and sort of kicking them to the curb. Well, in this article, Sony says that it expects Microsoft to honor their contracts because there are still games that Activision Blizzard held that were allowed to be ported onto the PlayStation and, through the general Sony sort of system, as well as Xbox and other PC platforms. So they are hoping that Xbox is going to honor those contracts, because then it also kicks open the door of things like breach of contract if the contracts are not fulfilled to term. The fact that Microsoft has made this purchase does not immediately put everything on the right path and everything going well. I think that it is certainly a step in the right direction and it will help, but it doesn't mean that it's a free pass. It doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy road to get there, and it's probably going to take a couple of years before everything gets settled as a result of this deal. So we have that to consider. Now, Bloomberg then put out an article on the 18th titled Microsoft Buys Scandal Tainted Activision in Bet on Metaverse. And again, this is what I'm talking about, where you have to be very particular about the language that you use when you are entering into deals and when you're making public statements, because saying metaverse suddenly brings to mind Facebook and the meta there and the issues that they have put forward with their lawsuits because of patents and copyright and that kind of thing. And it's very interesting because in this Bloomberg article, there is a paragraph that is the deal will also likely face tough regulatory scrutiny in the US, where big technology companies are being probed by regulators for their reach and influence. China, which has been sparring with the US already over technological issues, will also likely review the merger. Kotick, who has led Activision for 3 decades, came under pressure to resign after that Wall Street Journal post that felt he knew about the mistreatment of women. And this has global implications here, where even China is going to look at this merger and question whether or not some of those IPs are going to be allowed into their country because China, with its situation and its leadership, there are a lot of platforms, there are a lot of games that are banned because they have extremely different rules than the rest of the world. And as I said earlier, and the reason why the entire industry is blowing up about this is because it has more implications than just, do we finally get to see Bobby Kotick fired or let go from his highly coveted position? Because there are a lot more moving parts here that a lot of people aren't necessarily taking into consideration. And it's important to note that Kotick didn't initially want to sell, according to another person who was familiar with the talks of selling to Microsoft, but Microsoft was the only one that wanted to go through with the deal. That's also important to know because they weren't the only ones that were going to potentially buy Activision Blizzard. And what I mean by that is there is a Games Radar article which is titled Activision CEO Claims the Company Almost Merged with EA Before Microsoft Acquisition. Now, this is kind of interesting because if for some reason Activision merged with EA, to the gaming industry, they would mostly be dead. The company and the IPs would mostly be dead because nothing that EA has done in the past has been particularly good. In fact, they've been incredibly anti-consumer. There are plenty of articles you can go look up to state the same thing, where it would have been doomed. Monetarily, Bobby Kotick still would have saved face and he still would have walked away with a metric fuck ton of money. But ultimately, as in terms of the IPs going to Electronic Arts, that was repeatedly known as the worst company of the year for 2 years running back to back. That they were pretty much dead in the water. So the fact that Microsoft has the acquisition here is not a bad thing, don't get me wrong. It's just interesting to see how people have interpreted this information and run with it. Now, according to VentureBeat, Activision Blizzard actually wanted to sell, so they approached Microsoft. And this is how this acquisition even happened, was because in early November, the company brought the proposition to Microsoft and Xbox began working on the deal immediately. The details came together over the holidays, and now the two have agreed to terms of an acquisition that, of course, we know will close in 2023. So it's interesting that this was the ultimate play here, regardless of the third party lawyers for the employees of Activision Blizzard to talk to, regardless of the lawsuits, regardless of everything. Bobby Kotick did everything possible to try and save face, and you can see that in a few different articles that Young-Yi has covered in his video, which I highly recommend you check out. But it just stands to reason that the gaming industry is in a very interesting place. So when you look at the overall picture when it comes to gaming, there's a lot of interesting moving parts and there's still a bunch of different things that are left. Now, there's another article that I wanted to bring your attention to before we wrap up here, which is one that I came across through Input Magazine, and that is that Bobby Kotick previously also wanted to buy Kotaku and PC Gaming, and that is really funny to me because games journalism, as much as the general populace would like to argue otherwise, is supposed to be a relatively impartial and neutral party. Now, of course, that's going to depend on what you've been given in terms of writing, of what you're allowed to cover and what you're not allowed to cover. The fact that Kotaku, which has its own interesting reputation and hopefully will come back from the ashes, the fact that Activision and Bobby Kotick wanted to try and buy both of these news outlets would have caused its own set of issues and favoritism. And this is something also covered by Yang Yi, where he made a comment about how you're going to go the Jeff Bezos route after purchasing certain news outlets and how the headlines changed over time because of that and because of that conflict of interest. But, anyways, in this article, I thought it was funny because of the culture surrounding Activision Blizzard and all of the allegations that have come out and all of the lawsuits that have come out. Kotaku has reported extensively on the ongoing controversy surrounding Activision Blizzard and its CEO, calling Kotick vile and shitty to women. Similarly, PC Gamer has also covered the executive's apparent knowledge of and alleged participation in the ongoing toxicity at Activision Blizzard. PC Gamer reported that Kotick still gets paid way too much and may have blocked the release of about 700 reports of possible workplace misconduct, which Activision Blizzard denies. The media outlet also shared that Kotick once told an assistant he was going to have her killed. In fact, I believe we did talk about that at one point in a previous video where he called a woman up and left a voicemail saying that he was going to have her killed because she didn't want to do whatever it was. And it was so egregious and awful that if you did not like Bobby Kotick before, you certainly did not like him after that came to light. And it's no surprise that both media outlets in this situation decided they were not going to enter a deal with Activision Blizzard because of how bad their reputation is. And like I said throughout this video, that Microsoft and Xbox choosing to pick up Activision Blizzard to have the IPs and to have games be more accessible for gamers is a great idea on paper, but because of the reputation that Activision Blizzard has and the amount of shit that Bobby Kotick has done is so much damage that Microsoft is going to really have to work hard if they're going to gain the trust of the gaming populace. So, with all of that said, you are now caught up on the most recent information that I have about Activision Blizzard and my thoughts of the Microsoft acquisition. And we'll have to see what happens at the end of this because I'm still on the fence whether or not this is a good thing. And again, I do hope that the IPs do survive. I do hope that Overwatch 2 does become a reality. It, along with Diablo 4, were pushed back from release, but ultimately, I do hope that Xbox can do something good with the IPs and that they get some solid people working on these games and keeping those franchises alive because obviously it makes financial sense that you're not going to spend $70 billion and then fizzle all of that goodwill. But I still feel weird about this acquisition, and I'm still not sure if this was the smartest plan, but that's just my thoughts on the matter. I'd love to know what any of you think about this particular situation. If there's more information about it, we will, of course, cover it here on Gaming News. And with that, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of your patronage. I appreciate all of you tuning in to these videos and keeping things moving forward. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.